The next segment, or the segment that you are here for right now, is called Towards Inclusive Mental Health, which basically is a very solution oriented segment. While we spoke about the challenges and we spoke about the limitations, now is when we will speak about what is the way forward. And the first thing that we are going to do in this segment is something very interesting, which is going to be extremely interactive because it involves all the attendees to participate in what we are calling a crowdsourced mental health ideal therapy experience. Which we have facilitators for that who are here. Manjari, my colleague from Belong, will introduce them. Quickly give it over to Manjari, who's going to introduce our workboat session today, and then we will have Koval and Ipsa talk to us. Yeah, go for it, Manjari.
Great. Thanks, Lasya. I can also see that Koval has joined us, so if you could just bump her up.
I'm bumping her up, yeah.
Great. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Manjari from Belong. Thank you all for joining us for what has been a long but incredibly interesting and important day of talking about inclusive mental health. Like Lasya says, we're now on to the segment where we're talking about what inclusive mental health looks like. Of course, that's something we've touched upon briefly in previous sessions as well, but hopefully we can unpack that in more detail going forward. And we wanted to begin doing that by getting a better, more dialogic understanding of the relationship between power and mental health, so that we get a better sense of what your experience with that may have been like, and where you see the most important changes being made. So we're doing this to share this information with our partner organizations as well as our panelists, and so that we can implement some of this crowdsourced knowledge in Belong's mental health policies as well. Of course, all of this will be done keeping in mind your privacy, so you don't need to worry about that. So this particular crowdsourced activity is going to be led by Koval and Ipsa. And I'll now, request them to quickly introduce themselves before I move on to asking them a question, and then we move on to the more discussion-oriented part of this conversation. So Koval, Ipsa, if either of you are ready, we can go ahead with that.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Ipsa this side. I am a queer and Dalit affirmative therapist. I've been working in the field of mental health since 2016. And my specialty is that I specialize in dealing with issues that feminists, Dalit people, and queer people face in general. That's it for me. And my pronouns are they and she.
Thanks for that.
Hi. Yeah, hi, I'm Koval, and I run something called Bedlam Delhi. And for the past few years, we've been trying to create an open and safe and inclusive space for mental health professionals to engage with people, with each other, create a peer network where we can do workshops and knowledge learning sessions. But also, very importantly, we host something in tandem with the Hanklin Institute called Chilox, which is a pro bono group therapy session, which we've kind of tried to, over time, create in a way that anybody and everybody can feel welcome there and share their experiences and receive the professional help that they need.
Great. Okay, so over the course of this day, we've had a lot of people, commenting upon inclusive therapy, but we want to get your take on how experiences of therapy become limiting or non-inclusive due to structures of power that center some people while marginalizing others. Also, can I just request our panelists, whenever you're not speaking, mute yourself so that there's no disturbance from your end. Yeah, great, thank you. So, Ipsa, would you like to take this first, and then we'll ask over?
Sure. With regard to my experience, there's something that we call the charmed circle. It's basically based on what is acceptable falls inside the circle, and what is not acceptable according to society falls outside the circle. If you were to look at your identity and the politics that surrounds it, all the identities that fall outside the circle would obviously, by default, be marginalized. So, for example, if you're queer, if you're non-cis, let's say non-het, if you're from a minority religion, we need to look into culture while we are looking into the issue, because let's say if even the US, the culture is very different, the marginalization would be very different. In India, when we're looking at it, the marginalization would be extremely different. Though certain things are there that are very similar, like for example, able-bodied people, men, cis-het men, let's say upper caste or upper class or white, in that sort, are very similar to each other. So if you were to look at your identity and figure out where you form, you would see that the issue that you would be facing would be very unique to you. And because psychology is a very elitist subject, I have to put it out there, and it has a very bad history with regard to how it has been treating people who are different from what we would call, usual or not neurotypical, right? That makes it difficult for people to and also therapists to actually understand the power dynamics that might be there, and to then give services accordingly to their clients, keeping in these power dynamics in mind.
Yeah. Thanks, Ipsa. Koval?
Right. I think in my experience, one of the most common factors that happen in, especially I can only speak from my experience and the people that I deal with and help out. Often for a lot of younger people, it is just sheer problem of access. So they neither know where to go because there is not much out there, nor are they often able to afford it. And then there's an added layer that a lot of the time their families are either not in the know, or may not be able to engage with the idea of their children or their family members receiving therapy, or may outright disapprove of it. So a lot of the time, I think what happens is, because obviously we all know there's a certain stigma attached, but there are also certain layers of access that are completely removed from a lot of especially younger people. Then there's a very simple problem that I know that happens a lot, even among the people that attend, say, group sessions that we host. लैंग्वेज बहुत बड़ी प्रॉब्लम है, बिकॉज साइकोलॉजी पूरी की पूरी अंग्रेजी में होती है, हिंदी में बहुत कम होती है, और लोगों को इस बात में झिझक होती है कि अगर उन्हें वो ग्रामर नहीं पता है या उन्हें अपनी टर्मिनोलॉजी नहीं पता है, वो साइकोलॉजिस्ट से कैसे बात करेंगे. और ये लिंग्विस्टिक बैरियर भी बड़ा है, एंड ऑब्वियसली इट इज क्लोजली लिंक्ड विद क्लास, इट इज लिंक्ड विद अ लॉट ऑफ इश्यूज. So that is there. So I think generally speaking, and then मतलब एक बहुत बड़ी समस्या है कि psychologists का नंबर ही बहुत कम है. तो और प्राइस पॉइंट्स, इवन दो काफी लोग प्रो बोनो करते हैं, काफी लोग गवर्नमेंट सेंटर्स में करते हैं, सपोर्ट स्ट्रक्चर्स है, बट ज्यादा लोगों को पता ही नहीं है कि उनके पास अवेलेबिलिटी क्या है रिसोर्सेज की. जो भी हम लोगों का मेंटल हेल्थ का डिस्कोर्स है वो सारा का सारा बहुत ही प्रिविलेज सर्कल्स में रहता है, whereas जो नीड होती है वो अक्रॉस द सोशो इकोनॉमिक डिवाइड चलती है. उन लोगों को पता ही नहीं है कि अगर उनको सपोज अवेयरनेस है कि दे नीड हेल्प, उनको एक्सेस चाहिए, उन्हें ये नहीं पता कि वो कहाँ जाएं, क्योंकि ये जो डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन है बहुत ही अनइवन है. So I think that's a huge problem, and I feel like at the very rudimentary level, linguistics is one of the biggest ones.
Great, thank you for bringing that up. Now we can move on, I think, to the crowdsourced element of this conversation. I know Koval will be sharing her screen shortly, where we can jot down all of your points, and they will, really be leading this activity. But hopefully we can, have this session be, like Koval suggested, in both English and Hindi in some parts, to make it slightly more accessible. So, hum shuru kare, Koval?
Right. So I'll just introduce कि मैं यहाँ पे क्या कर रही हूँ. While the Belong team is also going to be taking notes so that they can kind of compile everything. I'm just compiling a very simple visual, almost like a whiteboard. Of course, we're working with certain limitations here technologically. So I have my little sketchpad, digital sketchpad. So whatever people bring up, I'm just going to jot down slide doodles, like, keywords or whatever summary. So it becomes more like an interactive session. So feel free to, add, throw words at me, कुछ भी बोलना है, दिमाग में random आता है. We obviously have एक process चल रहा है जिसमें detailed note taking हो रहा है. This is more like a fun, interactive, visual thing.
Yeah. I also just want to quickly add that this is an audience we've had with us for much of the day, and we're so grateful to you for staying on. So we really hope you will all participate and sort of bring some of your insights from previous sessions to this one as well.
I mean, just to get things kick-started, maybe I'll just jot down some of the things I mentioned. Ipsa, feel free to please give me pointers.
Sure.
So, Ipsa, you can sort of continue reading these out as Koval writes them, that would be nice.
Sure. Okay. Would it be okay if I switch off my video?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think people are anyway seeing this screen for now.
Yeah. Okay, good. Okay. So, with regard to language, something that I've to understand, and I can also put it in Hindi. भाषा बहुत important role play करती है. And the thing is, a lot of times आपको जितनी भी terminologies मालूम पड़ेंगी, those all would be in English. The fact that people don't know about something called Indian psychology, which is a branch of psychology that focuses specifically on the cultural needs that we have, and then look in it at as like in a much more fuller context. अगले इंसान का लैंग्वेज ये है, उनका क्लास ये है, उनका कास्ट ये है, उनका रिलीजन ये है, उनकी सेक्सुअलिटी, उनका जेंडर आइडेंटिटी, however you would like to put it, and how that intersectionality, और जहाँ पे आपने ये सारी आइडेंटिटीज एक साथ मिलती हैं, एक पर्सन को बनाती हैं, that then becomes an issue for a lot of therapists, because a lot of times they're not sensitive about a lot of these things, because this is not something that is taught in psych. We are taught a lot about the psychological aspect of it, but the sociological aspect of it is something that is not mentioned. The other thing that Koval is also writing about is non-normative identity. So sexuality, gender, I can also put sexual preference, let's say caste, class, religion, physical ability. Yeah. What else? Your skin color. Whether we like it or not, Indian बहुत racist लोग हैं, right? We have been, we have been colonized. हमारा idea of beauty is very whitewashed. जो गोरे सोचते हैं कि idea है beauty का, there's something that has been, kind of inculcated. A very simple example of it would be the skin fairness industry, right? And thus skin color becomes very important. Another thing that would also be that's something that I would like to look into would be the geographical location. For example, अगर आप नॉर्थ ईस्ट से आ रहे हैं, right? नॉर्थ ईस्ट के issues बहुत different हैं, and उनके experiences with regard to, let's say, coming to major cities like Delhi would be very different. And like I will say specifically, I'm talking about the north, not the central or the south, because that is what my experience has been as a therapist. कि बहुत ज़्यादा discrimination होता है. एक तरह से आप कह सकते हो racist भी हैं हम लोग to a certain extent, which is something that we need to look into as well.
I think so one could kind of roughly say that it's very important that the psychologists or the mental health professionals that are dealing are represented from among different communities and different identities, but also more importantly understand some of the identity politics and the identity conflicts or the identity conflicts that people go through, so they are able to engage with it. For instance, if I am from a certain community or from a certain group of people, and my problems are so deeply unique and they're based directly on, say, some of the things you mentioned, like caste or class or sexuality or religious identity or regional identity, and my therapist or my professionals are maybe not fully versed with what those conflicts are, there might be a constant barrier between me and my professional, or me and the person who's talking, because they simply may not be able to identify or be able to help, or they may not even know that this is a very valid and a very genuine cause. And I think in India that can be quite common, because we are a very, very, very complex country with a lot of complex identity politics.
True. And the thing is that as a therapist, your work is to not do more harm. Like, it's very, you can say, because we are paramedical, right? We also follow what doctors follow. Don't do more harm. It's like you are not doing any progress, you're not doing any work, that is fine. But if you were to bring in doing more harm by not being sensitive, that is a problem.
I just want to go back and check, have people sent any?
Yeah, so Surbhi has sent a message asking about age or generation. Do you think that
right? Absolutely. And I think this is something, I've experienced when, say, talking to my parents, where I would want to, say, try and get my father or my mother to access a therapist. उनमें automatic एक झिझक होती है कि we don't want to go to somebody young. Similarly, there are people who don't want to go to somebody older. And of course, so while it is generally difficult for people who have not grown up in an era where therapy is normalized, which is even not right now, but somewhat normalized, I think age often does play a role for a lot of people in just terms of sheer comfort. And that's something, I mean, eventually you have to be comfortable with the person that you're sharing, your secrets or your thoughts or your desires, your feelings with. So I think it becomes both gender and age, I think, are things that people do think about when they're picking or approaching somebody for therapy.
Yeah. I can add on to that the fact that you will see mostly people, I don't want to be binary, but like AFABs, assigned female at birth, or people who have bodies that menstruate would be are more with regard to therapy work than AMABs or bodies with penises. Because again, it's a very gendered work, right? A woman would be able to understand me better because this is their gender role.
Right.
It becomes immature.
I think there is another issue that we've experienced. People feel a lot with therapists is apart from this, general word of mouth group of recommended therapists. I've had friends who actively experienced trauma because of going to a therapist, where they shared some sort of sexual assault or sexual history, and they were shamed, and they were made to feel very bad, or they were told that they are not good people for having had sexual histories at all, despite being unmarried. And what that did was further cause them harm. And I think that is a sensitivity that without kind of any negotiation needs to be had across the board. So it's possible that more sensitivity toward among mental health professionals, that people need to feel like they can just open up without judgment, especially about their sexuality, their sexual history, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, there's another issue with this is what we call the medical gaze, where a lot of therapists and psychiatrists would look at a person as a combination of symptoms and not as a person on the whole. So they're like, okay, इनके साथ ये खराब है, ये खराब है, ये खराब है, ये खराब है, right? What is again a very neurotypical understanding of what is right, which is also again very white and very upper class, because these are the people who have figured out what should be followed, let's say, as a diagnostical tool in the entirety of the world. And that's all.
So I think a lot of these things can definitely be engaged with by a certain amount of sensitivity training or more conversation, because I think it's impossible for people to not have their own inherent political identity biases. But what we can sort of open up more conversations are about is to what extent those biases are coming through in sessions, in their interactions, and how they can be harmful to others. So more and more open conversations. And I know there are collectives, there are therapists, there are mental health professionals who do that, but there are sadly also a vast majority that somehow doesn't. And I think that is the community that I think needs to be targeted, because what's happened is over time, I feel a lot of people who had not exemplary or not ideal experiences with therapy or with mental health eventually end up shutting it down permanently as an option. So the trick is to at least have a basic level of empathy, non-judgmental sensitivity training to everybody, so that they know, okay, even if they have that inherent bias, maybe they could frame it differently, or they could possibly reserve it and make sure that they're putting the other person or their patient's feelings and needs above their own bias.
Oh yeah, definitely. Somebody I see is also said this, that their political identity is something that is very important, and I would definitely agree with this. As an example, I would say that I only see, like I said, I only see feminists, and that is something that is very important, because I'm just like, it's important for political ideas to also come into the space of therapy. like if I, let's say, I would never be able to work with an MRA, and I understand this as a, I would say as a down, like something that is not important in a way that, sorry, I'm just like a little out of words.
No, I understand. I think it works. I think it's so, again, this is such a complex and ethical, larger issue where IPSA, you being coming from your own political and gender and self identity, would obviously have many of your own boundaries, which are absolutely necessary. And at the same time, I think there are so many different parts of this, right? Like, one is that the politics of a person need to find some kind of possible, I guess, some kind of not mirroring, but some kind of commonality with the person that they're sharing it with. And I think this is possibly one of the most difficult things to find, that you're not sure. But what if, say, now, especially in India, again, there are a lot of people, right from very privileged to not privileged at all, who are engaged in political activism or activism, environmentally, political, so many different kinds. And they tend to unfortunately face a great deal of trauma. They tend to face possibly the greatest deal of violence and persecution, and do definitely need therapy. And then we have a very unique situation where, you may not know if the person you're going to, or if you do manage to get lucky enough, will also share your beliefs. Again, I think that this is very difficult to negotiate, because then you maybe want to go back to what I said earlier, that even if your beliefs may not fully echo with your patients, there may be sensitivity training or a general kind of empathy exercise in empathy, where you know that that is something you cannot bring into your interaction. But this is, again, it's too nuanced and it's too complex to and maybe this is a good way to start a conversation, and I'd love to hear more about what people say.
Yeah. So at this point, I just want to especially get people's inputs on what they would like their ideal therapy or mental health experience to look like, with regards to community care, with regard to group therapy, with regard to how do we move mental health beyond, the onus being on the individual more generally. So if people have ideas or suggestions, we can move on from, talking about some of the non-inclusive elements of therapy currently. So move on from there to talking about how can we make therapy more inclusive. So please feel free to share your ideas. Like I said earlier, I know a bunch of you were there for the earlier sessions, so I'm sure there's been a lot of food for thought there. In the meantime, Koval, IPSA, do you have any ideas for how we can maybe move to a more community-based approach when it comes to therapy?
Sure. I think I've been advocating for possibly like at least stronger peer-to-peer networks, listening networks, sharing networks. And I think that while the group format is not always the most effective, obviously it has its limitations. It's a great placeholder. It's a great entry point. And also, I mean, for a lot of people, if that's the only option they have at their disposal, I think it's definitely better than not having something. And the model that we've tried to operate, and I think it's worked to a certain extent, and possibly we would like to engage in the future and see if we can expand that model, is simply have certain safe spaces created. That's what we've done. We've created one static physical safe space, which has been consistent over 3-4 years, where people feel very sort of autonomous. They don't feel like there are any barriers. There's no formality. And there are, of course, people, mental health professionals, psychologists, clinical psychologists, psychiatrists who convene these sessions, but there's no screening, there's no filtration, there's no barrier in the middle. And I think for a lot of people, it is arranged from people who are not sure whether they'd like to actually invest in the process of therapy, so they're okay coming for a group session to see how this whole thing feels like. People who can't afford it, people who are too nervous to do it alone, or people who are just generally comfortable and need a sense of community and support. So I will always try and push for the fact that to a great extent this could be a very, very good route to access more and more people, to sort of widen that circle.
Yeah, just to add on this, so just to add on what Koval said, a lot of examples can be taken from specifically the South, and how they've done a lot of community-based work where, psychologists and psychiatrists have come together, kind of informed people about, in communities themselves as to how and what to look for, build that rapport, uh, train them, and then set up a community-based service that people in themselves are able to facilitate. We don't need, let's say, a psychologist or a psychiatrist to actually come in and look into what is happening, because people themselves are able to, take care of the issues that are happening in the community themselves. The other thing, like Kola said, that group therapies can be something that is very helpful. For example, if you take an Alcoholic Anonymous or any kind of anonymous addiction specifically, you would see that that is something that is not facilitated by a mental health professional, rather facilitated by another addict themselves, which kind of helps break that power dynamic of a person who will look at somebody through that gaze of judgment, whereas people would feel themselves to be more understood when they are talking to somebody who is also, I would say, a victim to the addiction in itself, or a survivor of the addiction in itself.
Yeah,
So I think
sorry.
I would love to hear from people who are attending this session on how they feel about the format of group and peer network therapy, and if so, like what they would want more from it, or what are their reservations about it. I think that would be a very interesting conversation.
So Anisha has actually sent in a really interesting message, and there are a couple of things I'm sure we can take away from it. So Anisha says, as a student of psychology, I feel the education or training for psychology was wrapped up in theories and less aware about the role of larger structures that cause mental illness. I feel studying English literature gave me more insight into the tide and ebb of communities, feminism, and movements that led to the idea of the self. So what I'm getting from this is that, and it speaks to something Zehra said earlier on the previous panel, which is that certainly in recent years, there's been a push for psychology to be a hard science in the way that other sciences are understood, as representing some kind of objective truth of the self, which, as Zehra flagged, is not always the case, because it's not devoid of power, which is what this whole conversation is about. And so issues of power do play out in therapy. Therapy is political, and when we sort of centralize perhaps more humanistic forms of knowledge and find ways to make those forms more accessible, as seems to have been Anisha's case with English literature, perhaps there is some way in which people will be able to get help outside of therapy rooms as well. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a very relevant point. Like I said earlier, that we can't divorce people's identity politics and their political ideology / the systemic experiences they have from how their mental health is impacted. And often, I think in a lot of psychology frameworks, the focus is squarely kind of removed from that. And possibly also, I think I could speak for my experiences, where I think a lot of people would be more possibly open to sharing, to feeling more comforted if they felt that therapy wasn't just an individual activity of self-reflection, but also something that related to a larger sense of community and their political identity. However, I'm not sure how much, like I'm not fully aware of how much that has been implemented, or to what extent that exists in spaces such like whether there are spaces where psychological issues, mental health issues, and identity politics are examined consistently together or shared together. If anybody knows, that would be lovely to hear.
Yeah, so basically the thing is that we need to look into how postmodernism has changed therapy in itself. So for example, if you were to take narrative therapy, which is a very postmodern approach towards therapy, it talks a lot about an eclectic approach as to we take into narratives of the other people, always put it on a, always make sure that the person is listening to the person's lived experience and is able to give the due importance that is there, instead of coming from this space of, okay, I am a therapist and I know better. We have a different idea of, I am a therapist and I know about psychology. You are the person and you are the master of your own life. How about we work together, instead of, okay, I am the therapist and I will tell you what all to do and what is, let's say, wrong with you. So a more strength based approach and narrative
Right.
postmodern approach rather than what we had before.
Right. We've received another message, and I just want to bring that in because I know we have about 5 minutes left, but this is important to talk about. So maybe this can be the last thing we get your thoughts on. So Ankita says, sensitivity towards those who do not conform to normally accepted norms around the family. How do you feel about that? I might not be someone who believes in putting up with bullshit from that my family unloads on me solely because they're my family. I've had experiences where my therapists have told me that I can't say those things about my family or parents. That has made me feel guilty for a very long time. And sometimes, as Indians who hold family as a very sacrosanct institution, how can we look at the need to bring in a different perspective and say that it is okay to not be someone who conforms to this, who doesn't conform to sort of complete reverence to the family, and is not interested in making up with the family, and that being the only way, and that is not the only way to live a mentally healthy life. So
I
because
think that's something that comes up so often, and not just in the sense of non-conformity or not being sociotypical. I think it's just generally that we often fail, and this may not go down well with everybody, but we also often fail to see that in India specifically, or generally all over the world, but India specifically, the family itself can be an intense site of oppression and trauma, and very often it is right from abuse to microaggressions to also just generally not being good for one's mental health. And I think this is a conversation that doesn't happen nearly enough, that families can be both a cause of mental health issues, as well as an impediment to helping to address those. And I think this is a very, very common issue that crops up, especially I think now more than ever, where people are feeling more and more empowered to say, okay, I don't think I need to follow this traditional path for my family, or this very patriarchal, heteronormative idea of, respect your elders, respect their opinions, irrespective of whether they are harmful to me or to others or not. So I think that is something families' roles, I think, need to be definitely addressed largely. And I'm sure a lot of mental health professionals, again, this would be a sort of, this is again a sort of barrier where it's one of the first things that one is judged for, or is possibly kind of, told to veer towards some kind of reconciliation or making things work, which obviously is not necessary or desirable in many cases. So I think that's a very valid thing, and maybe more conversation needs to be had about the family's role, not necessarily as a, and I think this is also a form of neurotypical, ableist, and general biased sort of thinking, where I think a lot of conversations that happen in mental health are about also the role of the family as the caregiving site, or as a support structure, and not enough is often told about whether the family is capable of being a caregiving site or of being a support structure. And for people who come from, say, abusive families, or even very conflict driven families, that might be very counterproductive because it alienates you further.
Yeah.
To add on to this, so basically I would definitely agree with the fact that we don't need to make peace with the family environment. Like, as an eclectic therapist, I would say most, like last is I think also mentioned here, that you can't heal in the same environment that made you sick, and I would 150% agree with that, because most of the issues that you're experiencing as an adult have come from your childhood, right? There's no other place. You weren't born with these issues technically, and thus we need to look into what is the role that family does play. with regard to this, there is always possibility of change, and I have personally seen a lot of families kind of healing together when they were able to understand that the trauma that they were all experiencing were affecting each other. And that is a possibility, but it's a very rare possibility. On the other hand, you would usually see that the individual would have to distance themselves emotionally in order to heal. And like they said that you can't really move away from the family, because to a certain extent, specifically with regard to the generation that we are not as, let's say, economically independent as our parents, because we are not following the normative script of, let's say, do this, be in this job, get married, have children, all of that. On the other hand, we also don't have a script at all, right?
Yeah, I
And
think
Yeah.
yeah, you
I
said,
have a very quick one to add, because I just realized while I was going over the workboard that we completely missed out. So I just had one quick note. Is the entire field of psychiatry is something that we haven't discussed here at all, and how deeply scary that is for a lot of people, and the sheer amount of misconception, the sheer amount of exploitation involved there, the complete lack of information and access to what medication, psychiatric intervention looks like, and just generally, because it's something that still for most people, unless they've directly had an experience or are trained, remains something shrouded in extreme mystery and almost horror. And I think that's going to be one big challenge that has not yet been covered in popular discourse.
yeah, definitely. I would say that it goes back to the whole talk about the medical case with regard to psychiatry, which is something that they kind of only look into. Not a lot of people from psychiatry are also, like, a lot of people from psychology are not taught about the social aspect about all of
Correct.
this. Yeah.
Correct.
The other thing that I can also say is that we need to look into the concept of chosen family that has come from queer experiences, right? Family doesn't have to be that biological family that you were born into. We can have our own chosen family and have that sense of belonging, comfort, and support. And I would say that even non-queer people can look into the fact that having their own chosen family.
Right.
Yeah. Could I just, at this point, I think we're going to have to start closing up because we're pretty much out of time now. And I know we received a lot of questions that we were not able to answer because we received them around after 4:35, and at that point there just wasn't enough time to answer them. But they're great questions. So if maybe you could reach out to Koval and Ipsa, and if Koval and Ipsa could leave their details somewhere, that would be great. But I mean, I essentially just want to end on the note that was flagged by Apurva, who says it would be nice if therapy questions normative ideas that cause distress instead of guiding us towards accepting things as they are. And I think that's really sort of the entire point of this conversation. That's sort of what we hope to achieve through sessions like this and through events like this. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Koval and Ipsa, for all of your insights and for just making it, giving us a space to voice our thoughts and have such an important conversation. So Koval's just writing down her email ID, and I'm sure Ipsa will also share her details.
Ipsa, if you're okay, I can just put down yours as well.
Sure. It's actually very easy. Just my name @gmail.com.
Perfect.
Okay, great. So thank you all. Lasya?
Thank you so much, Koval, Ipsa, and Manjari. This was a very interactive and interesting session. And thank you for all the participants and attendees who actually pitched in your very, very incredibly valuable ideas. And also thank you for staying on since the beginning of the event itself.